So now let's talk about the second subsystem, the organization. The organization is all the organization that you put in place to organize your business, to execute your idea, to put in motion the value subsystem we just talked about. It basically comprises the three blocks, on the left, key activities, key resources, key partners that are sometimes complemented by the sales channel that is part of the organization and sometimes customer relations. Basically, there are four paths that can lead an innovation in the organization into building a long-term and fair competitive advantage. These paths are: shorten the development cycle for the new generation of your product, but also maybe sometimes lower the cost of development of the next generation of your product. Or it can be gain a cost advantage. And the fourth path is how you're going to turn things, core activities, resources, into core assets that you will leverage as barriers against competitors. So let me quickly walk you through these four paths. So first path, shorten the development cycle of the product. This is beautifully illustrated by the success of Zara. Zara has been successful by putting in place a production system that allows them to react to the latest fashion trend within 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, they can identify a trend and produce a line of clothes that follows that trend, which means that it's a very smart way for them to always remain at the very lead of the market without having to anticipate again on these trends in a very volatile market. Second path, lower the cost of development of your product. This has been recently illustrated by Boeing. Boeing developed its latest airplane, the 787, the Dreamliner, by putting in place a very original, very unusual, very tight collaboration system with subcontractors, submanufacturers. In that system, Boeing actually controls only 30% of the development and the manufacturing of the airplane, and 70% is outsourced to partners. If you read the news, you probably learned that Boeing is having a hard time to get the system to work. But you can also observe that this is a very smart, very audacious way of rethinking the development of commercial airplanes. And definitely on the long run, if that system proves to work, it obviously will have a dramatic impact on the cost of development of the airplane. Third part is how you reorganize the execution of your idea, the left part of the business model, so you can gain a cost advantage. This has been repeatedly and very beautifully illustrated by the history of Dell. Dell entered the computer market in the late 80s, the early 90s. And they entered that market based on a very simple idea, selling computer directs. Where did that come from? It comes from the history of the personal computer. When that product first hit the market, it was technical, the market was highly uneducated, so that led to the emergence of a reseller network that performed the critical service tasks for the customers. For that service task, the reseller were used to getting paid about 30 to 40% of the final price of the product, but they were performing again a critical task because customers were uneducated. But as time goes on, customers learn about personal computers. They started to learn about how to install, what kind of software they needed, how to hook a printer onto a computer. So the layer of service that ended up by being produced by the reseller was getting thinner and thinner, and they were still capturing 30 to 40% in the cost structure in the PC industry for a very small value. So what Dell did is very simple. He made the decision to shortcut that intermediary, the reseller, and sell directly computers to the end users, which allowed Dell to reintegrate 30 to 40% of margin in their cost structure, which was a very smart move because it allowed Dell, as a startup, to gain a cost advantage in a cost-driven industry without having to reach high volumes. But the story doesn't stop there. By the late 90s, two major things happened for Dell. The first one is the boom of the internet. And the second one, the fact that they started to observe that the cost advantage that they were benefiting from selling direct was eroding rather quickly. So Dell reorganized entirely the organizational subsystem of their business model to regain a cost advantage based on a simple idea, actually two simple ideas. First, leveraging the boom of the internet by boosting as much as possible online sales of computers. By the late 90s, Dell was already selling over 30% of their entire business online. And second, by putting in place a very sophisticated manufacturing process that allowed them to actually manufacture the computer after it had been ordered by the customer online. Putting in place a very tight collaboration with subcontractors that would quickly deliver all the parts necessary for building a computer, fast manufacturing and fast delivery, so the computer could be delivered in a few days after the customer had placed the order online. Such a model allowed Dell to remove from their cost of operation some critical components. No inventory for spare part, no inventory for finished product, and also Dell started to operate with negative working capital because the cash coming from customer orders were coming onto Dell account within a few days after the order, long before Dell had to pay its suppliers. Such a model that Dell put in place in the late 90s allowed them to become, by 2006, the #1 PC manufacturer. And the fourth path for creatively rethinking your organizational subsystem for creating a competitive advantage is how to leverage core assets and turn them into barriers against competition. This is particularly important for technology ventures because in essence, a technology leap doesn't last. You may patent it, in the best case, like in the biotech, it will last for the duration of the patent, but most of the cases, it doesn't even last for the duration of the patent. It takes a few years for competitors to come up with a comparable, sometimes even a better technology than what you've got. Which means that the growth path of a technology venture is always structured around that critical question. How are you going to turn a technology asset, a technology differentiator, into a longer lasting asset? This is very well illustrated by the story of Google. Google started in the early 2000s, in the late 90s, by a technology innovation in the search engine. Google today is having 70% of market share in searches in the US and over 90% market share in Europe. Does it come from the fact that Google is 3 or 4 times better in terms of search relevancy than other search engines? Personally, I doubt that. But Google managed to actually negotiate that path, converting a technology advantage into long-term assets. Long-term assets are what? Brand value, user base, usage. People are doing their search on Google basically because they are used to doing that. So they don't see the point in going to a competitive search engine. It works fine. So this is a critical path for a startup, how you convert a volatile asset, a technology asset, into a longer lasting asset. So this is how you look at the organizational subsystem. It leads to identifying 4 potential paths for building an unfair competitive advantage. Shorten the development cycle, lower the cost of development, gain a cost advantage, or find a way to convert assets, resources that you're gathering into barriers against competitors that will support your business in the long run.